Did it do it? All right, greetings everybody, and thank you for coming to today's operator meeting. My name is Hannah Hickam and I will be your host for today. Remember that you can chat your questions in as they come to you, and we'll answer them all at the end. And first up is Jane Stanzik, and then can you let me know, Jane, which one of the presentations you want to go first?
That one called workflows.
Oh no, I can't hear you, but that's probably because my sound is muted.
Uh-oh.
I can hear, if anybody can hear me.
Yes, I can also hear you as well, Jane.
I can hear you.
Continue, I'm sorry.
But Hannah's driving. She has to be able to hear me.
I do have to be able to hear you, but I can now, so that's great. Sorry about that.
Okay.
And which one do you want to go first?
The one called workflows.
All right, I think it's this one.
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right, go on.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad a lot of folks could make it. It was a little bit short notice, and it's certainly not our regular time, but there's just a lot of information we want to be able to provide for everyone on the implementation of these new financial assurance rules. Some of this presentation is a repeat in a way of a presentation that Julie Murphy, Director Murphy, and I gave back at the May 10th meeting, but this one has a lot more detail than we were able to provide a month and a half ago, or just a month ago. What day is it? Well, it's not even a month. So you'll see there's a lot of steps on each of these slides. I'm not going to read through all of them. You guys can read, but the point is to get it out there. It'll be posted where we always post things, so you'll have access to it and you can digest it and bring your questions to the next meeting, because there's just a lot to digest. But certainly if you have questions right now, I'm happy to try to answer them. So next slide, please, Hannah. So here's what's in these slides. A little bit of information about the Surety ID numbers that we always use to identify financial assurance. I'm going to introduce a new well designation that we decided was needed to have all of this implementation work, and that's called reported plugged. Then I have workflows for the transition period, and then the workflows after the transition period, and then a couple slides on the types of Form 3s. Next slide, please, Hannah. So a little bit about Surety ID numbers. So some of the ID numbers that exist now are going to stay the same, but others will change, and we'll explain all of that when we get to the Form 3A. But the approval of the 3A and whatever financial assurance you provide with that form, that will be the mechanism for assigning new Surety ID numbers. And the workflows for Form 3s, 2As, 2s, and the Form 3A, they're going to vary somewhat. We conveyed that to you in the past, and nothing's changed with that. There's going to be a variety of paths that it's going to be a case by case. So in some, because of that, in some cases, there won't be a Surety ID number available at the time that a Form 2A or a 2 is submitted, or when it's reviewed, or in some cases, even when it's approved. And that's different from how we've always done it. So just a heads up that things are going to be a little bit different in terms of workflows. And the most important thing for you to know is that if the Surety ID is not available, then it obviously can't be required and won't be required on the 2A or the Form 2. And then here's a little bit about this new designation that we've decided to create to help keep track of wells that fit a certain scenario. So we've defined plugging and abandonment means you plug the well, taken out the facilities, and abandoned the flow lines. And financial assurance will not be required for wells that have been plugged and abandoned. An annual registration fee will not be required for wells that have been plugged and abandoned. But as you guys are aware, it's the staff's approval of a Form 6 subsequent report of abandonment that changes the status of the well to P&A, PA, plugged and abandoned. And but there's a backlog of Form 6 subsequents that are still waiting to be approved by staff. But we want to recognize in all of the sorting and filtering and lists that these new rules require, we want to recognize that those wells have indeed been plugged. And so rather than add a new status, we're adding a designation, and that's called reported plugged. And the well is designated as that as soon as we receive a Form 6 subsequent. But the status is not good. It won't change the status of the well. It won't change to plugged and abandoned until the Form 6 subsequent has been approved. And that's how it's always been. So we're just putting it designation in our list of designations to flag those wells for which the operator has reported to us that it has been plugged. So thanks, Hannah. Next slide. Okay, so we've been talking about the transition period and the workflows within that. So just to be clear, the transition period started on April 30th. And it goes until, and it's different for different operators. The transition period goes until the operator's initial financial plan has been approved. And so the first plans will be submitted in July. The last plans will be submitted in December. And so there'll be approvals happening from July through, I don't know, next January or February to get everything approved. So not everyone has the same transition period, but this is just explaining what it is. I've got a couple rules there that are communicate that, the rules that speak to this transition period. And the thing to remember is that the transition period is in Rule 702, which applies to operators with wells. So if you're an operator without wells, there really is no transition period. The new rules went into effect on April 30th, and we're now in the new rules. So just a little explanation there. Next slide, please, Hannah. Okay, so here we are in the transition period. An operator has existing wells and locations. So those wells will be included in the operator's initial financial assurance plan. And upon approval of that plan, there may be additional financial assurance required. For new locations through the approval of an OGDP and the associated Form 2As, and for new wells during the transition period, we explained before that before your plan due date, we're going to process your OGDPs and APDs as is with your current financial assurance, because that's what the transition allows for. After your plan due date, if your plan is in here, like you've submitted it, we'll continue to review and approve OGDPs and APDs, again, using your current financial assurance. And then upon approval of your plan, your OGDP may be approved by the commission with a condition of approval on the 2As to provide financial assurance, and the approval of an APD by the director may have a COA to provide additional financial assurance. And this is the part that's case by case. Next slide, please, Hannah. So transfers. So for operators with wells or transfers that are transferring wells, before the initial plan due dates, the transfers will be reviewed, processed, and approved using your current financial assurance. But after your plan due dates and after your plans are in, no transfers are going to be approved until the operators have an approved initial plan and have filed, as required by the Rule 218, filed a revised plan. But a transfer without wells, there's no plan involved. So your Form 3As and your financial assurance will be filed concurrently with a Form 9 subsequent. Next slide, please, Hannah. So existing facilities and operations that aren't wells. So if an operator has wells and obviously has other facilities and operations, all of the facilities and operations are going to be included in that operator's initial plan. An additional financial assurance may or will be required upon approval of your plan. If you're an operator without wells, you need to file a Form 3A and required additional financial assurance for any facility or operation by September 1st. So that requirement became effective April 30th, but we don't have the Form 3A done yet, and we're giving you a little time. For new facilities and operations, whether or not the operator has wells, you need to file a 3A and financial assurance concurrently with whatever registration or permit application you're submitting. And meaning these things listed 1 through 6 that are in Rule 703. So the things that are in red are the changes that were made in these new rules effective April 30th, and those represent the additional financial assurance that needs to be submitted by September 1 if you don't have wells, or will be required upon the approval of your plan if you do have wells. I know that's really confusing, but hopefully this slide, you can digest it and understand it. Okay, next slide, please, Hannah. And this is about Rule 704, the surface owner protection bonds. So for existing surface owner bonds, again, they'll be included in the operator's plan, and any increase will be required upon the approval of the plan. For new locations and new wells, it's the same workflow as for OGDPs and APDs. So additional financial assurance will most likely be required after the approval of the OGDP or the APD. And all those things in red in that third box, those are all the changes that were made to the surface owner bonds in this new Rule 704. So that's all about workflows during this transition period. Jared had a question, Hannah. If there's, now we'll do all the questions at the end. So next slide, please. So now all of these next 8 slides are the workflows once an operator has an approved plan. So this is a workflow just for the approval of the plan. And again, Julie and I went through all of this stuff a month ago, but we had like 3 bullets instead of 10 plus some sub bullets. So this is just a more detailed workflow and explanation. It points out the differences between a modified and unmodified option 3 and option 4 plan. So I don't think I need to read through all this. we've just put it together and we're making it available to you for you to use as a reference. Next slide, please, Hannah. So that was about your Form 3. This is about OGDPs, and it starts out with the operator has an approved plan. So again, this is after the operator's transition period. This is the workflow for OGDPs. Next slide, please, Hannah. Same thing, the operator has an approved plan and they file a Form 2. They file for a permit to drill. So here's the workflow and some notes about that. Thanks, Hannah. Next slide. Here's the transfers of operatorship with wells. And this is after both the selling and the buying operator have approved plans. The rules require that revised plans be submitted. Rule 218 requires revised plans be submitted for transfers. And in order to accommodate that requirement, there's actually going to be 2 Form 3s, revised plans that meet that requirement. So the first one will be filed after the intent is filed, and it is more of a generalized, it's quantitative but not detailed. So it's going to describe the transfer, the impact on both the buyer and the seller, and staff will review that to see if there's any concerns about the proposed transfer. And then after the Form 9 subsequents are filed, then the buying and selling operators will file another revised Form 3, which is all the detail, the entire list. So both of these Form 3s will be populated by the then pending Form 9 intent and Form 9 subsequent. So I know you may look at this and said, oh my gosh, I have to fill out 2 Form 3s. The fact that it's almost entirely auto-populated, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Staff, the financial assurance staff will review the 9s and the 3s. The director can recommend certain Form 3s, and if so, there'll be conditions of approval for filing any required additional financial assurance. Some Form 3s will be require commission approval. Same thing, the order will address any additional financial assurance that's due. And so in both cases, whether the director or commission approves, operators may be required to file Form 3As, and financial assurance. And once those are approved, then the transfer will be approved. So this is like how we've always done it. The transfer is not approved until whatever additional financial assurance is required has been posted. Because the new financial assurance rules are pretty complicated, it's possible that a selling operator would have to provide additional financial assurance if it impacts that operator's financial assurance option or whatever. So it's just a little more complex. Next slide, please, Hannah. So here's the transfers without wells. There's no revised Form 3 required, but there could be additional financial assurance required, just like there was in the old days. And again, the Form 3A and the financial assurance needs to come in at the same time. Next slide, please, Hannah. So here are kind of some scenarios. These are workflows for a new operator. So even before, a new operator files a Form 1 to register. But until you're an operator, you don't have any assets. You don't have any wells, you don't have facilities, you're just brand new. So the new operator is going to get registered, just like always, have a Form 1A to designate agents. and will get web forms credentials so they can file forms. So then if that registered operator, newly registered, buys some wells, because that's why they became an operator, then there's steps 1 through 7 for how that process will go. If they buy facilities only and don't have wells, then there's 4 steps for that. And if they apply then for their first OGDP, there's the steps for that. So these steps are a little bit abbreviated. The details in the previous slides apply to these processes. Next slide, please, Hannah. Oh, so looking at Rule 703, which applies to things that are not wells, this is just the workflow for the 6 different types of financial assurance required by Rule 703. And this is very similar to how it's always been. Thanks, Hannah. Next one. And here are the steps for a surface owner protection bond. Because these are tied to locations and wells, it has the same flexibility, case-by-case workflow that OGDPs and APDs will have. And so the flexibility, staff, you will know as an operator which path your workflow is going to take once staff has started the review of your OGDP or your APD. You won't be like up in the air and not know what's happening. Staff will communicate. Next slide, please, Hannah. So here's just a couple slides that have some facts about the different types of Form 3s, the plans. There's an initial plan. The rules call for a revised change of circumstance. They also call for the revised annual review. Next slide, please, Hannah. And Rule 218 requires a revised plan for a change of operatorship. So again, I'm not going to read through all this. You guys can read it and send questions. I think that's it, Hannah, on this set. Yep, sure enough.
That does appear to be it. What is the next one called?
You could just do the Form 2.
Form 2. Does this look right?
It does. Thanks.
Great. All right, here we go.
Okay, so just to show you the revised Form 2. So I think at the last meeting, we said that we were aiming for yesterday to release revised forms. I think it's going to be Monday, which is June 6th. I actually have a meeting as soon as this meeting's over with our developers to finalize the release. But here's some information that you can look at when you actually see the new form next week. Next slide, please, Hannah. So, you know, when we release a new version, we have different ways of handling it. So the current version is 7.0. The new version will be 8.0. When you open a form in web forms, you can see it says version or VER, and then it has a number. So that tells you which version your form is in. So upon release of the 2, hopefully on Monday, if you go in to create a new form, of course, it's going to be the new version. If you have any forms in draft, they're going to be flipped to the new version. Forms that are already submitted, if they were submitted before April 30th and are still in process, they're going to remain as the old version. But submitted on or after the 30th, they'll convert to the new version. But of those that are in process or on hold, if they get returned to draft, they're going to get flipped to the new version. So next slide, please, Hannah. Okay, I have the same information about surety ID numbers because you'll see that what we changed is all about surety ID numbers. I have a statement about federal wells, which we talked about last time, that a federal well is a well for which you've provided financial assurance to the feds. And here's the tan box, the bottom box is essentially instructions for how to fill out the new data field on the Form 2. So the rule says that the operator has to demonstrate that it has provided or will provide financial assurance to the federal government at the time you file a Form 2 for that particular well. So in terms of forms and information, demonstrating is going to be checking a box that you certify the fact that you have or will provide, and entering the amount of that financial assurance that you provided to the feds or will provide for this particular well, because you're completing a Form 2. So the way to determine that amount, if the well is or will be subject to a bond that covers more than one well, you're going to divide the amount by the number of wells it does cover and enter the amount apportioned to that particular well. If it's a blanket bond, either statewide or nationwide, again, you're going to divide the amount by however many wells are subject to that bond, and you're going to put in the amount that's apportioned. In talking with the BLM, they explained that you can have a well that's subject to more than one of these bonds. And if that's the case, you're going to enter the sum total of whatever financial assurance that the feds have applies to that particular well. And of course, this is all an exception that will end no later than next October 15th, 2023. So of course, we'll have to revise, probably end up revising the forms when that happens. Next slide, please, Hannah. So this is what it looks like. This is the old, there's on a Form 2, it says reclamation, financial assurance, and you put in the surety ID. Again, you might not have a surety ID, but here's what the new looks like. Now, if you're going to provide financial assurance to the commission for the well, you check that box, and you might have a surety ID number. And if you don't, it's no big deal. Alternatively, you might not be providing financial assurance to the commission because it's a federal well and you have or will provide financial assurance to the feds. So you check that bottom box. And if that bottom box is checked, you have to put in the amount. And the previous slide told you how to calculate that amount. It's possible for, in the case of a tribal well, neither of these boxes will be checked. But clearly they can't both be checked because you're either providing at this time, when we're in this exception period, you're either providing financial assurance to the commission or to the feds for a given well. I think that's my last slide, Hannah, but maybe not. Oh, sorry. So this is on a different tab, and the amounts for the surface owner protection bond have been increased in the drop-down choices per the rules. And again, there is a surety ID number field there, but it's only if it's applicable and available. So that's the Form 2. Those are the changes. Thanks, Hannah. Can we do the 2A, please? Next. So the 2A is essentially the same thing, of course, except it's the location version. So next slide, please, Hannah. Again, here's the version numbers. Old is 11, new is 12, and the explanation of how the forms in the system will be treated when we release the new version. Next slide, Hannah. Here's the same information because it's the same concept captured on these two forms. The reason it's on both forms is because the rule says that the operator is going to demonstrate the financial assurance to the feds, both on a APD and at the time of filing an oil and gas development plan. And so for the OGDP, the information is on the Form 2A. Next slide, please, Hannah. So here's old and new. You can see the new, we rearranged some of the existing data fields and checkboxes, and we updated the names to line up with what the rules say now. We added the surface owner protection bond, and then the federal financial assurance is the same sort of checkbox as the Form 2. And I do think that's the last one on there. Yeah, thanks, Hannah. What's happening? Okay, I'm almost done. Okay. Okay, fine. Sorry, guys. Okay, Form 4, I think is the next one, Hannah. Next slide. Same kind of information, version information for the Form 4. Next slide. And this is what changed on the Form 4. The old at the top is the notice of continued temporarily abandoned status. That is gone. That was removed from the rules. And in its place, there's a report of temporary abandonment and a request for temporary abandonment exceeding 6 months. So there's two check boxes. You can check one or both. And just like before, you have to provide an explanation in the comment box at the bottom of this tab, which is the engineering/environmental tab. And I do think that's the last one for that. Yep. So those are the only revisions to the 2, the 2A and the 4. And I hope that we release them on Monday. Watch the website for an announcement that they've been released.
Great, thank you, Jane. We only have one question so far, but if folks have questions, they can just chat them into the chat box. This question is, hi, the Form 3s are due by July 1st for operators with 50 or more wells. If there are pending Form 9s, who reports the Form 3s, the seller or the buyer?
Well, both. Form 3s will be required from both the buyer and the seller. Jared, you want to answer that question?
Oh, Jarrett, you're muted still.
You're muted.
But I got the sentiment. Oh, you're still. Oh, I know why. He can't because I have not allowed him. Sorry, Jarrett.
You guys.
Here you go.
Thank you. I was saying I can't unmute to answer the question. So who reports the Form 3, the seller or the buyer? Well, the thing is that as Jane went over with, it depends on the date of the plan without the pending Form 9. So we're going to continue to process Form 9s under the own rules until the date that the buyer and the seller are required in accordance to the number of wells. If the buyer is buying enough wells to push them up to an earlier date, once that Form 9 is approved, then they should have go in and start the Form 3 at that time. So the buyer, let's say the buyer had less than 50 wells, but the purchase is going to give them more than 50 wells. Once that Form 9 is approved, if it's July 15th and the 50 well deadline was July 1st, well, at that time, the buyer needs to go ahead and file their Form 3 based on their new number of wells. If the seller had, let's say, more than 50 wells, but the transaction is going to take them under, well, they would probably still need to go ahead and file their Form 3 in accordance with the 50 well deadline until those Form 9s are processed. Does that help?
Thank you, Jarrett. And then if there's any follow-up questions, just put them in the chat. We will answer them. The next question is, any updates about the Form 6A release? It does not appear available on eForms.
No, nothing news available on eForms. We'll let you know when it is. The Form 6A, we're still testing it, and I would hope, well, I'm always hoping that we're going to get it out soon. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect it next week, not Monday.
All right, thank you, Jane. The next question is, for the Form 9 transferring items spreadsheet attachment, it will be updated to include will it be updated to include the new information required, or should operators create a separate attachment?
Oh, no. No, the revised Form 9 will have new data fields in the proposed for transfer, and then also on the subsequent, the transferred wells and facilities. It'll also have one entirely new tab, and that's to gather information about the location for any low producing or inactive well that's being transferred. And you know, that the Form 9 probably be done here in a week or two. And I'll have a slide just like I had just now for the 2, the 2A and the 4 that shows you exactly how that works.
Great, thank you, Jane. The next question is, in the last operator meeting, you said that we are no longer required to submit Form 4 continued TA sundries. Do we have to submit Form 4s for continued TA?
No, it's not in the rules anymore. The rules changed. If you look at 434B, I think it is, where there's 2 Form 4s required for temporarily abandoned wells. And it's pretty clear in the rules. You report it, and then if you're going to have it longer than 6 months, you request approval for that. But there's no rule for the continued temporarily abandoned. It's gone.
Great, thank you, Jane.
And those rules aren't too tough. They're pretty easy to understand. Just take a look.
Great. And the next question is a well on federal surface but has fee minerals considered a federal well?
The federal surface minerals thing is not used at all anymore. It's all we're using as a criteria for a federal well is whether or not the operator has or will be required by the feds to provide financial assurance to the federal government for that particular well. In our discussions with the BLM, it became clear to us that what we've always used in the past, which was federal minerals, does not cover all of the wells that require federal financial assurance. So essentially, it's kind of like a new definition. And when an operator with wells files their initial Form 3, there will be a list of all their wells, and every operator will have to tell us. They have to identify which wells they've provided financial assurance to the feds for and how much. And going forward, that well will be identified in our system as a federal well. And until the exception, and during this exception, there will not be there will not be financial assurance required by the commission for those wells.
Great, thank you, Jane. That's the end of the questions, unless folks have more
There was a
questions.
staff question to clarify where my tongue maybe got twisted around. The question is, for operators with wells and with other facilities, is the financial assurance for those other things that aren't wells due on September 1st or due with their plan? And the answer is they're due, that's due for their plan, not September 1st. September 1st is if you do not have wells, there's no plan required, so you just got to send it in.
Great, thank you, Jane. And it looks like that's the end of the questions. I'll allow you all to look at this long list of upcoming operator meeting dates. We added a bunch of dates for June and July to help cover these financial assurance matters. If we don't have anything a couple days leading up, we'll just cancel it and move whatever to the next week. But things are, being moved and shaken, and we'll have lots of things to report on in the next few weeks. And then I also differentiated which ones were regular and which ones were financial assurance specific, because the financial assurance ones are a little bit shorter. We usually plan the regular operating meeting for about an hour and a half, and this one's only planned for the hour. So hopefully you've had a long enough time to take a look at this. I also send this list out of the upcoming dates in every single one of the emails, which brings me to my next point. Here's my email address if you would like to be added to the list. I got like 10 people last time, so I'm thinking that a lot of folks are still making their way here from the website and not from the list. You can make your way here however you want, but if you want to be on the list, you can email me and I'll put you on the list. And we haven't had any other questions come in, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you everybody so much for being here today. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you,
Thanks, Hannah,
Hannah.
for hosting. Thanks, Jane, and Chris, and Jarrett.
Yep,
You
thank
all.
you guys very much.
Bye, guys.